Having me. Thank you all for being here today. It's good to be back. And I've seen a lot of you also at a few other local places, Life at Elon. I might be playing some of the same pieces. Not all, I have some different ones, but if you don't mind hearing them again, hearing the same stories. And also at the Elon Community Church. I think I'll be there subbing this Sunday, actually. So it's just a nice thing that we'll see each other soon. I see a lot of people familiar. So I was here over the summer. I was here a year ago. And at that time I was doing what I'm still doing now. It seems to never, I feel like I'm getting closer to the end of this dream I've been living on, but I keep finding new repertoire. And that is that, I probably told you this, I'm pretending to be a violinist. I'm obsessed with the violin. I'm just completely obsessed with the old recordings of people like Nathan Milstein, was his birthday, anniversary of his birthday. Yasha Heifetz, Yehudi Menuhin, Avery Gitlis, you name it. These Misha Elman, I love this. It's just, I'm obsessed with it. And there was this thing that happened. I watched this documentary, The Art of Violin, on PBS. It's free on YouTube, by the way. I highly recommend watching it. If you're cold and snowed in next week and you have nothing to do, watch it. And my wife very shrewdly or wisely talked me out of switching to the violin. It's too much trouble to switch instruments. So this is plan B. It's playing violin music on the piano. So that's what I've been doing. But before anything, I want to start off with, I like to improvise. And the reason is because the more I read things about the past, about the 19th and 18th centuries and before, classical musicians used to improvise all the time. And it's only in the last, 50, 60, 70, 80 years that it's sort of become less of a custom to do. But I think it's, why not bring it back? It's fun. And so I need your help. There are different ways to do this. Over the holidays, I would do very silly things. I would say, okay, let's take the Christmas tunes, like Jingle Bells, for instance, in the style of Prokofiev or something. But let's do this today. It's still very much up to you what it's going to be. That's what scares me a little bit. I was lump in my throat. So let's pick a few. Could you help me pick some random notes? We're going to come up with a theme. You can use flats and sharps too if you like, but be nice to me. So let's pick a random note. Anybody? E flat? Oh, B flat. Yeah. Another? F. A flat. Couple more. Okay, that's getting odd. Let's go. And one more. G. Almost a tone. I like it though. I have to remember that. So, do you want to give it a title? Anybody? I'm sorry? Waldo. Okay. Let's see what happens. Anyone else? Twin Lakes HQ. Okay. That has a nice ring to it. Waldo dash Twin Lakes HQ.
I was thinking of Emerson.
Yeah. We'll do both. Because this is a little bit like the peaceful. Twin
Blake's Etude, version 1. Okay. You never know what's going to happen with these things, and that's what's scary but also interesting about it. I'm now going to do, it's a continuation of something I did last time. I did this at Life at Elon too. So last time I was here, I played the first movement of Beethoven's Violin Concerto in his piano version, his piano arrangement of it. And today I'm going to play the second movement, which is considerably shorter, and it's very calm, especially for Beethoven. So a little backstory for this piece. I think that the first performance in 1806, to put it politely, it did not go well. It was actually a disaster. And most of the audience fell asleep. And really, I don't think you will, but Beethoven, you can imagine, was not happy. Actually, there's a story that the violinist at the premiere, he noticed that the audience were asleep, and he decided there was a break in the piece somewhere, he decided to improvise a country fiddle tune. He took his violin, turned it upside down, and improvised it. Can you imagine that at Carnegie Hall today, something like that? But that's the thing that intrigues me about the past. It seems that the performing tradition approach was a lot more informal than today. We've become really formalistic about things. But at any rate, it didn't go over well. Probably because the piece is so introspective and lyrical, and it's not the typical thing you're expecting from Beethoven. But this time, 1806 was a pretty significant year for Beethoven. It was at this time that he was fully coming to terms with the fact that he was losing his hearing. There were signs of it in the 1790s, but it really was clear to him leading up to that time, to 1806. And there's a letter he wrote. You can find it online. It's called the Heilige Stadt Testimony. He wrote it to one of his brothers, and he describes what he's going through. There's one part of that letter he talks about being in the countryside, which he loved very much. He loved the countryside. And actually, this is sort of a pastoral concerto, like the symphony, the Sixth Symphony is pastoral, right? So, but there was this scene he describes that there was a shepherd singing, and his friends noted that. They said, "Oh, it's beautiful singing," and he couldn't hear it, and he was so distraught. And it was around this time he started isolating himself more from people. Can you imagine if hearing aids existed back then? It would have changed things for him, really. And he even said at one point he was considering seriously to take his own life because he didn't see any hope. But somehow he found hope eventually. And I think that's really the universality, the power of Beethoven's music, is that despite everything, there's this hope. In that sense, he's truly a product of the Enlightenment era. It reminds me of the old joke from the 19th century, comparing and contrasting German culture, a place like Bonn, where Beethoven was from, and Vienna, a place where Schubert is from. Because I would say Schubert was in spirit. I love Schubert, but he was completely romantic. And whereas Beethoven was paving the way for that, but he was very much Voltaire, Rousseau. He was a product of the Enlightenment. And here's the joke that explains the difference, I'd say, between Beethoven and Schubert. Beethoven was from what's now Germany, ended up in Vienna, but he was German, right? And Schubert was from Vienna. We'll talk more about Vienna. He was born in Vienna. You know what the difference between Berlin and Vienna is? This is a joke. Okay, I'll tell you. So the difference is that in Berlin or in Bonn or in Hamburg, where things are very serious, but there's always hope. That's Beethoven. In Vienna, it's the other way around. Things are not so serious, but there's no hope. And that's Schubert in a way. But before I go on too much, I think that's what Beethoven leaves us. And then for that reason, I had a professor in school who said Beethoven was Tolstoyan music. I didn't get what he meant at the time. But then I read some of Tolstoy's essays, especially one that's called What is Art? He talks about an opera production, standing backstage. And Tolstoy comments, what is the point of all this when there's true and genuine suffering in the world? And that's a valid question. Why even bother? And he finally concludes that idea, that thought, by saying, if just one person walks away with a little more sensitivity in their heart, it's done its job. And that's something to think about. And I think that so Tolstoy does it, I think Beethoven does that. This tetrad, he said, you have music that's in the realm of aesthetics only. It's beautiful, but it stops there. Then you have someone like a Tolstoy or a Beethoven who goes beyond that into ethics, meaning it speaks to something about human nature, something about goodness, kindness, all those things. Despite all that, Beethoven was a pretty, not a very pleasant person to be around. He had a lot of demons, inner turmoil. But at any rate, there's that description of him, but a man who could write music like this violin concerto, I don't think it's possible to have been a bad person. It's just not. At any rate, this is sort of a hymn of sorts. It's very hymn-like. H-Y-M-N, that kind of thing. And just to be clear, so finally, why is there a piano version of this piece? It's because the first performance, remember I told you, was a disaster. And Beethoven was sort of talked into rewriting it, refashioning it into a piano concerto by his good friend Clementi, another great composer. So that's what he did. And this version is sort of not played all that much, but it fits right in perfectly with this crazy thing I'm doing, pretending to be a violinist. I'm glad that there is this. So here's the second movement of the Beethoven violin concerto. about this. One is you notice that there are some moments where it gets either so quiet, or even literally, there's pauses in it, silences. And I think it's because Beethoven increasingly was living in a world of silence with his hearing, and also in isolation from others, which was self-imposed a lot of the time. There's, it sounds like a hymn, this. I was explaining this piece to my dad. My dad is, well, it's a long story, I've probably told you this, but my parents are both immigrants. My mother's an immigrant from the Soviet Union, my father's an immigrant from southeastern Virginia. And the gospel thing, which is going to come at the end, that's probably the first music I heard as a kid. Bill Monroe, Ralph Stanton, all from my dad. And then my mother, being from the Soviet Union, is just classical music all the way. So that's kind of what people tell me, what's with the classical and the gospel? I don't get it. Well, that's what it is. And then I grew up in New Jersey, of all places. I don't advertise it, but New Jersey's a good place. It's a good place. But I was explaining this piece, I don't mean anything about it. I was explaining, this piece to my dad. We were talking about it. I said, so here's a hymn, which signifies maybe the church music. It has that feeling. And then you have these French horn calls, which suggest the countryside. Those are the French horns. The countryside and all that goes along with country living. So my dad said, oh, it's just like Southern culture, church and the countryside. It's very familiar to me. So the point is music's universal, what I'm trying to say. I think it's for everyone. So more music that's a bit on the heavy side. I make concerts, I try to think of meals. Now we're in the roast beef and potatoes part. If this is heavy, this lighter thing is coming, just don't worry. I'm going to play a couple movements from César Franck's Violin Sonata. This is an arrangement for solo piano by Alfred Cortot. People just call it the Franck Sonata. I don't, because it sounds too much like Frank Sinatra. Who's great too, and by the way, also he's from New Jersey, so you see, Frank Sinatra. But this is the Franck Sonata, not the Frank Sinatra. And César Franck was this Belgian-born composer, lived mostly in France. And he was interesting because we don't talk about this phenomenon too much in the arts. We usually talk about the child prodigies, the Mozarts, the Mendelssohns, etc. By the way, Beethoven wasn't. His father wanted him to be and abused him in that sense, but it didn't. That's a big trauma. It was a big trauma for him. But Franck, I think he had a similar thing where his father sort of tried to make him into a prodigy, but he wasn't. And he wrote all his masterpieces, I think, after the age of 60. I love that, because Bruckner was like that as well. There are a lot of composers who were the opposite of child prodigies. And our culture needs to celebrate that more, because youth is overrated sometimes, I think. But at any rate, Franck he was by all accounts, a very humble and quiet man. He was quite religious. He was, playing church organ, that was mostly what he did. And there's a story about his late compositions. It could have been this one, and maybe it was the piano quintet. It was one of these great works he wrote in his older age, the Symphony in D minor. There was a concert featuring these pieces, and his wife was sitting next to him. I found it hilarious, and his wife got furious with him because she said afterwards, this music is so intense, it has so much emotion. I've never seen that from you in these 50 years we've been married. Who is this person that I married? Do I know you? And I just found that really funny, that music could cause that. But anyway, the Violin Sonata, of course, I'm sorry, I wish I could play the violin with you, but you stick with what you know, I guess. The Violin Sonata is an iconic piece. To this day, it was in that time too, in the late 19th century. And here's a story about this piece. The two great Soviet musicians, Sviatoslav Richter, pianist, and the violinist David Oistrakh, they talked about this. They played it, they recorded it, it's incredible. And David Oistrakh felt that this was drawing room music, that's what he called it. Richter said, I think it's Marcel Proust in music. What did he mean by that? I love the literary comparisons. There's truth there, because there's a fictional violin sonata in Swann's Way from the La Recherche du Temps Perdu by Proust, the big novels, set of novels. There's a fictional violin sonata by this fictional composer whose name is Van Tye, if I'm saying it right, my French is bad. So most people think that that fictional sonata is the Franck violin sonata. And that Franck violin sonata, I mean the fictional sonata in Proust, it's such an important part of the plot. It's kind of symbolic of Swann's coming of age and everything. It's ultra-romantic violin sonata. And furthermore, the way Franck's music develops, it's kind of like the way Proust's writing goes. It's not, say, Beethoven is like a narrative, almost. You go from point A to B to C. In this French stuff, right before the 20th century, it's like a stream of consciousness. It's like you're in a dream. It goes in circles. You'll see what I mean. It's like Proust's writing, I think, which is similar. There's no actual plot really in Proust. It's just these long flashbacks, these memories, these dreamlike, trance-like things. So anyway, I'm going to play the third movement of the Franck sonata. It's called Recitative. Recitative is in an opera when a singer is semi-speaking, semi-singing. You've probably heard those parts, the prose parts. Between arias, that's a recitative. And that's what this is. And I think at least the first 2 pages were probably born out of this organ improvising in church. Think of it, especially in an enormous church. Let's say you have communion. An organist has to improvise. And sometimes it can be very long. Sometimes they'll finish what they want to finish, but there's more people taking communion. So that's just my thought. I just imagine Franck in a big cathedral. I forget which one it was, maybe Saint-Sulpice or somewhere in Paris he was. And he just has to keep improvising. And that's where this comes from, I think. And again, it's very intense. It's not easy listening to Franck sonata. It's nothing like Frank Sinatra, so really it's all right. Third movement. piece by Tchaikovsky. This is the melody in E flat major. It's originally he wanted it to be part of his violin concerto, which is modeled on the Beethoven. It's also in D major, but he chucked it. He wrote something else for the second movement. I don't know why, but this, I mean, they're both good. But this is a standalone violin piece, melody in E flat major. And what I say about Russian music overall, I mean, it's hard to generalize with these things, but funnily enough, Tchaikovsky's colleagues, his contemporaries, didn't consider him Russian enough, whatever that's supposed to mean. You know, because he doesn't use folk music quite as much as Mussorgsky or Borodin, but I don't think these purity contests are silly. It's a good thing no one does that anymore today. Okay, but you know, if you know this melody from Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto, tell me when does it end, really? You know, but you see, it never really takes a break. It's endless, you know. It just goes on and on and on. My mother always says, you listen to that, you see Russian landscapes, wide open space. That's what she would say. She also would say, you read Russian literature, long sentences for one page, or fill up one page. What I would say is Russian friends and relatives telling stories that never end. And then I found that that's exactly the same with the southern relatives I had. But that's a different story. Maybe we're more alike than different. So here's the Tchaikovsky melody in E flat major. ago. This is Fritz Kreisler's Viennese Caprice, Caprice Viennois. And I think I need to tell you a bit about Kreisler as a person. He was among classical musicians especially, he was just unusual in that he was always smiling and he was just a genuinely happy, warm, bubbly person. Beethoven was not, Brahms was not, Rahman, they mostly were not, but Kreisler was. There's some silent film footage of him I saw recently, and he's just smiling all the time. It's like sunshine just comes right out of him. And if you want to cheer up, if you're ever feeling a little low, go to YouTube and listen to his recordings. That sound, even the scratchy old recordings, you will hear the warmth of his personality. Kreisler, I was talking about Vienna, and most of the great composers, actually, they ended up in Vienna, but they were born somewhere else. Schubert was born in Vienna. Kreisler was born in Vienna. I bet Johann Strauss, the waltzes was. But Vienna is this sort of anomaly. It's interesting because on the one hand, it has this sort of cheerful culture. I mean, this is the waltz, the culture of the waltz. You ever seen the New Year's Day concerts from Vienna? That's Vienna, right? It's just the glitz and glamour, and it's this whole thing. But Vienna also has a dark side to it. And maybe people don't like to face it. And I would say you look at the work of someone like, musicians like Schoenberg or Webern or Berg, their music shows that other side of Vienna. And some of the expressionist painters, even Sigmund Freud, he was from Vienna too. So Vienna has this shadow side to it as well. That's psychology, right? And Vienna, there was a historian, I think it was, who said Vienna with their waltzes waltzed right off of a cliff in the 20th century into an abyss, because the descent into fascism, into anti-Semitism, and Schoenberg, for example, luckily he was Jewish, Kreisler was Jewish, and they were lucky, they got out, they came to this country. Did you hear Schoenberg's, a lot of his manuscripts burned in the fires in LA. It's a tragedy. He ended up there. And if you don't love Arnold Schoenberg, well, listen, he wrote some romantic music too, he wrote, but anyway, I'm playing Kreisler. So Kreisler ended up in New York, and he loved, his favorite thing to do, I read, was sit in Central Park, stare at the trees, and just talk to people, random people. And I love this story. Whenever he did a concert, and I remind myself of this, he would tell people, his friends, he said, I don't give concerts, I simply go and see my friends. I love that. It's just a quote I just love. And maybe you've heard this from me before, but there's this story I just love, that he hated to practice. He never practiced, And he's giving a recital with Rachmaninoff, who was his friend, but almost like a Laurel and Hardy, they were so different. Because Kreisler was this thin guy with a mustache who was always smiling. Rachmaninoff was this enormous 6.5 foot tall Russian guy with a shaved head and a scowl, a permanent scowl on his face. Someone, I think Stravinsky said Rachmaninoff looked like an escaped convict. They didn't like each other, Stravinsky and Rachmaninoff. But at any rate, this famous story of Tchaikovsky and Brahms, they hated each other. And then they were in their older age, they got together and had a few drinks, and then they liked each other. So I don't know. But it's true. So they both did a little too much of that. So back to, sorry for the tangents, I'm sorry. Kreisler and Rachmaninoff, they're in Carnegie Hall, they're giving this concert. And Kreisler messes up. And he walks over to Rachmaninoff and whispers, in the middle of the concert, where are we? And Rachmaninoff, without even the slightest grin, just gruffly retorted, he said, Carnegie Hall. I tell that a lot, because this is so funny. So, but this piece is that happy side of Vienna. That's all. It's just, and it's the happy part of Vienna. It's Vienna before it went off into, this part, because it's a waltzy lullaby, really, and it is a tribute to his hometown. It's Kreisler's loving tribute to Vienna. So the Viennese Caprice. Caprice Viennois. couple classical pieces. I have a couple gospel things to close with. I know this. A lot of people like that. So I'm going to do some Spanish music now. So we're going to a really different part of Europe here. I saw this silly thing, but actually quite true thing on Facebook, which said that there's a map of Europe. And there's actually there's simply two parts of Europe. There's butter Europe and olive oil Europe. And it's true. And everything I've played up till now is pretty much butter Europe. It's the French, Belgians, Beethoven, they cook with butter. Well, now we're going to olive oil Europe. It's also a different climate. I think of something that pianist Sviatoslav Richter, he said to Rostropovich, the great cellist. I actually heard him live. Heard him play and conduct. Never forget those moments. But Rostropovich said that he was young and naive, and he went to Richter to rehearse a Brahms sonata. And Richter said to Rostropovich, he said, "What do you think the weather was when Brahms wrote this?" And Rostropovich said, "How should I know? Why would that matter?" And Richter said, it had to have been raining when he wrote it. And he started playing, and Rostropovich said that he got what he meant at that point. And for example, that Franck piece I played, it must have been raining because Belgium is never sunny. Anyone been there? My dad went there for a trip. It was a business trip, he said, and he was there for a week. It rained the entire time. And then during the lunch break, the sun came out. He said everyone, like dazed, they all ran out. And after 3 minutes, it started raining. And that's fun. I mean, his music is like, but this is sunny Spain. So does the name Pablo de Sarasate ring a bell for anyone? He was a great Spanish violinist and composer. He lived mostly in France, but his music is just infused with Spanish folk music, which is pretty much flamenco. More on that in a bit. But this piece is called habanera, which is not only a delicious pepper, but it's a type of dance. And with the roots of it are actually in Cuba, Havana. Cuban music is interesting because it's a mix of, on the one hand, Spanish music, but also West African music, and the rhythms there. So I'm going to play you the rhythm of a habanera, and you're going to know exactly what the melody should be for it. Oops, this F sometimes. Come on, wake up. Uh-oh. Where did it go? Oh, there we go. Okay, so, the cold weather does things to pianos. It's just my piano at home. That was supposed to be on. Right? Not bad for one finger. So, Carmen, Bizet's Carmen, this is habanera, because the habanera became all the rage in Europe at this time. So this is obviously it's a different piece, it's not that, but this is Sarasate's habanera. And, okay, here's what I'm going to say about this piece. This is the very non-insightful, non-scholarly, silly thing to say, but whenever I play it, I just have in my mind a picture of either a bullfighter or a conquistador just standing there. I don't know why, it's so Spanish. And yeah, so here it is. It's the habanera by Pablo de Sarasate. If I press it too hard, it does, but if I press it softly, it works. Okay. I have to remember that. But if you hear this, it's not my fault. So, it's Sarasate coming back to punish me. Okay.
As you can see, olive oil. Oh,
Olive oil Europe's also a little more extroverted. So, not always, but it's just, pieces. So I'm going to close the classical part today. I have two gospel things to do at the end. I'm going to play another Spanish piece, but it's by a Cuban composer. So it's interesting. It would be as if Gershwin or Duke Ellington wrote a piece about England. It's the same idea. This is Ernesto La Cuona de Malagueña. It's a famous piece. You've probably heard it. You may have heard it on guitar, probably. Classical guitar, or there's a vocal version. He, the composer himself, La Cuona, wrote lyrics for this at some point. There's a violin version, which is how it made its way into this program. Actually, the real way it made its way into my fingers was, it was never going to, because my piano teacher, who we lost not so long ago, last year, Solomon Mikowski, was born and grew up in Cuba. And he adamantly refused to let me play this. He said, and I imitate his accent very well. He didn't think so, but I do. And he had this wonderful accent. He would say to me, Robert, you cannot understand this music. You're not from Cuba. You're not from Spain. How can you play it? He was right. I think he was right. But there's a place I go to in Raleigh and play a lot. There was a lady there who kept begging me to learn this. Every time I go there, and I started to feel guilty. And guilt can be a great motivator. I'm learning that as a parent. Well, that's not a good way, not a good way. But it motivated me, and I said, fine, I'm gonna learn it. So, but here's the odd thing about it. This is the only actual piano piece, because it's originally a piano piece. It's the only actual piano piece I'm playing today. It's not some sort of an arrangement. So there's a pure piano piece right here. The inspiration for it is definitely flamenco music, though. Malagueña means a woman from Malaga. Malaga is a city in southern Spain. It's one of the great capitals of flamenco music, you could say. So, now flamenco music, I touched on it a little bit with Sarasate, but I'll say a little more about it. Flamenco music is a melting pot just like Spain and its history. Because Spain, remember in the Middle Ages, before the Inquisition, it was Arabic, it was Muslim. There was also a large Jewish population with thriving, synagogues, communities in places like Cordoba and Seville. And there was this whole mixing of cultures. And that's really where flamenco comes from. You listen to the chanting of cantors from the Middle East, and from Spain at that time, it's still preserved. You can hear flamenco in that. If you listen to the Arabic lute music, not too different from flamenco, because flamenco has absorbed all these things. And it's all in here as well, in this piece. So, Lecuona was this great, great Cuban composer. People refer to him as the he was like, they call him the Gershwin of Cuba. I don't know if I like when people say that there's a composer I like very much named Medtner, a Russian composer. And they would call him the Russian Brahms. I don't know if he appreciated that much, because he was just Medtner, and Lecuona was just Lecuona. Anyway, as usual, I'm rambling, so I'm going to play the Malagueña by Ernesto Lecuona. Southern gospel by popular demand. I'm just kidding. Here's one that's a little bit more on the lyrical side. This is one, do you know this one's called Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown? It's an old hymn. It's one of those that they don't put in the hymnals anymore, which I think is too bad. If you like old Western movies, there's one, a black and white movie from 1950 with the same title, Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown? So here it is. I'm going to, a little country gospel flavor to it. George Jones sings it. I think of him when I play this. I can't play the violin or sing like George Jones. All the things I wish I could do. I just imitate.
Emulate and try to.
You could, yeah, you could. And that's the thing that people, another part of my life story is I studied for a while with a very great Russian pianist named Vladimir Vyardo. He ended up in Texas, so I went to study with him in Texas. And it was interesting, there were many things of culture clash. I was driving him once, and he was very Russian, and he said to me, with his thick accent, he said, "Do you like barrel full of crackers?" And it took me a while, but I understood what he was saying. And I said, "Oh, you mean the Cracker Barrel?" And he said, "Yes." And I didn't know what he was going to say. I thought he might say that it's horrible, it's nothing like Moscow. He said, "I like it. It's very similar to the Russian peasant food. I like it." And by the way, in Russia, the word peasant is not pejorative, it's the opposite. It's funny, I learned that, but at any rate, that kind of gospel it's kind of in the air in Texas, like it's just, that's how they do it there. So I'm gonna play When They Ring Those Golden Bells, but in two different styles. One is the style of, say, Tennessee Ernie Ford, a little more straightforward. And then I'm going to do more of the style of someone like Jerry Lee Lewis or even Mahalia Jackson, or a little more, well, they were both, by the way, from Louisiana. So it's got that extra Cajun seasoning to the style. It's just a different style of gospel. So, and some churches would never do it, but there are some especially in Texas and Louisiana, that would be normal church service hymn style for them. At any rate, here it is, two different styles of when they ring those golden bells.
Thank you very much, and
It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Liz.
turn this thing off.